Salutations and welcome, horse racing fans. I'm your host, Matthew DeSantis, and this is the Win Play Show, a podcast devoted to all aspects of horse racing and handicapping that is proudly part of the Amalfi Media Network. With less than 10 days until the Breeders' Cup, we're going to take a look at the headlining race of the weekend, the Longines Breeders' Cup Classic. Now, before we get to that, I just want to remind everyone to follow, download, rate, and share the Win Play Show on the podcast platform of their choice. We appreciate all of the support, and a big thank you to all of our YouTube subscribers as well, and you can find our YouTube channel linked in the episode notes. Finally, I want to let you know that we have a full week of content coming up at the Win Play Show. This Friday, I'll have a weekend preview for the races at Keeneland, followed by a race recap podcast. But starting on Monday, November 1st, we have an absolutely stacked week for the Breeders' Cup that will be led off with my interview with NBC's Donna Brothers. That's right. Donna Brothers came on. We talked for about 45 minutes. She was wonderful, told a lot of great stories about a young Steve Asmussen running horses down in Alabama, and D. Wayne Lucas and Todd Pletcher and Mike Smith, and she just had a lot of great stories to share. So that's going to be a wonderful interview that's coming out on Monday. And then on Tuesday, I'm going to have a special top 10 Breeders' Cup races of the last 20 years episode. I was like looking back and remembering those great races. And then finally, I'll have my official picks show where I give you my win, my place, and my show for every Breeders' Cup race, juvenile and adult. And the best place to get all of that is to subscribe and follow the Win Play Show, or go to amalfimedia.com, or follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Okay, so let's dive into the Breeders' Cup Classic. And let's start with who isn't there, because I think for some people who may not be keeping up with the day-to-day horse racing coverage, there might be some glaring omissions. And you might sit there when I start talking about the field and go, well, wait a second, what about this horse? What about that horse? Indeed. What about those horses? So let's start with several Breeders' Cup win and you're in winners who will not be participating. Cafe Faro, Mandaloun, Mishriff, who's staying over in Europe, and Maxfield, who is instead running the Clark at Churchill Downs later in the month. So those four horses all won a win and you're in race. Mandaloun, by disqualification, won the Haskell, but if you remember, that was where Hot Rod Charlie kind of cut off Midnight Bourbon, and Midnight Bourbon spilled, and it was a whole thing. Fortunately, everybody was okay, but it was, Mandaloun won that through disqualification. But still, a very good horse, and, will not be able to be running this year at the Breeders' Cup, though, for a decision to stay out of this. Other notables who will not be running: Midnight Bourbon. Steve Asmussen's horse is going to get prepped for its 4-year-old campaign, and I think that's a horse looking ahead to 2022. That's a horse I absolutely love on the adult circuit. The 4-year-old and up circuit, I think this horse is going to be spectacular. Some of its top competition is going to go out to stud and retire. I really like Midnight Bourbon. I've always liked that horse, and that horse just keeps getting better. So, but Midnight Bourbon will not be there. Tis a Magician will not be there. Concert Tour will not be there, and Rombauer, who won the Preakness, will also not be there. So those are some household names, even for casual fans. A horse like Midnight Bourbon, a horse like Mandaloun, a horse like Rombauer, all were relevant during the Triple Crown run this year. So you probably were familiar with some of those horses, even if you don't follow horse racing on a day-to-day basis. Now, aside from those horses, when we're talking about the Breeders' Cup Classic, I'm going to focus on the likely runners. Now, if you go to Bovada and you go to some betting sites and you look at future bets for the Breeders' Cup Classic, you're going to see horses like Life is Good or Forza de Oro or Dr. Post listed. None of those horses are running in this race. Life is Good will likely run at the Dirt Mile at the Breeders' Cup. I think Life is Good is an outstanding horse, but will probably run the Dirt Mile. Dr. Post is skipping the Breeders' Cup altogether and will probably be running next to the Cigar Stakes. So when I talk about the field, I'm already kind of filtering out some of the horses that there's a pretty good chance they're not running, or we already know they're not running in some cases. And the final piece of news that I'll share that I want you to keep in mind is that this will be the last race for Essential Quality and Knicks Go. Both have agreed to stud and sire agreements with prominent farms. And I also imagine this may be the last race for Medina Spirit. I don't think there's been an official announcement on that yet, but this will be the last race for several of these horses in their careers. So that's always something to keep in mind, always something to think about as you go into that last race. So, what I want to do today is go over the likely field, give you some thoughts on each horse, and perhaps their winning strategy and what they bring to the table. Now, I'm going to hold off on my predictions until my picks episode next week. Part of the reason for that is I like to look at things like post position. I think in this race in particular, that can matter. And I also want to wait until the field is actually official, until we actually know for sure who is going to be in or not in the race. But you'll probably get a sense of where I'm leaning with my thoughts on each of those horses. So, with that said, let's take a look at the field for the Longines Breeders' Cup Classic. And it's a mile and a quarter on dirt for 3-year-olds and up. And we have a 10-horse field speculatively right now. You'll see the early odds if you're watching on YouTube. The early odds are over there on the right-hand side. Those are based off Bovada. These are not the official morning line odds, just to be clear. So let's start just from the top with the favorite, Knicks Go, trained by Brad Cox, who won the Whitney Stakes, going off at 3-1, early odds. Essential Quality, also trained by Brad Cox, won the Belmont, the Jim Dandy, and the Travers Stakes this year, is early odds at 7-2. Hot Rod Charlie, trained by Doug O'Neill, recently won the Pennsylvania Derby, finished second at the Belmont, going off at early odds 7-1. Medina Spirit, trained by Bob Baffert. Of course, a very controversial Kentucky Derby victory that still may get wiped out, but also did win the Awesome Again Stakes out at Santa Anita, going off early odds at 15-2. And then you have Art Collector, trained by Bill Mott, who won the Charlestown Classic, which I was there for, and the Woodward Stakes, who's going off at 8-1. Max Player, trained by Steve Asmussen, who won the Jockey Club Gold Cup and the Suburban Stakes. Early odds there are 8-1. And then you have a little bit of a gap in terms of the odds. You have Tripoli, trained by John Sadler, who won the TVG Pacific Classic, going off at 20-1. Express Train, trained by John Sheriffs, who won the San Diego Handicap, going off at 33-1. And then you have Idol, trained by Richard Baltus, who won the Santa Anita Handicap, I should say, also going off at 33-1. And then finally, Stiletto Boy likely will run in this race. That is trained by Ed Moger, and finished second behind Medina Spirit at the Awesome Again Stakes. And there's not even early odds on Stiletto Boy, so you can probably get a pretty good price if you think that horse actually has a shot. So let's think a little bit about this field. And based upon the odds, the betting line is showing you that this is a 2-horse race between Knicks Go and Essential Quality, the 2 Brad Cox horses, the 2 Grays. I think most of us think it's more of a top 4 situation, with Medina Spirit and Hot Rod Charlie being significant factors in this race. I'm actually surprised there's as much of a gap between the top 2 and the next 2 as there are, and how the next 2 are kind of clumped with Art Collector, who I think is a kind of another tier down. But let's go through each of the 4 really quick. So you have Knicks Go. Knicks Go's got one strategy: blitz the field. I mean, Knicks Go wants to run fast. He gets to the lead, he takes the lead, and he pushes the pace. And he just kind of beats horses into submission with an incredible pace. The faster the pace, the better things will typically go for Knicks Go. My friend Len always says if he's got an opening half of 46-3 or faster, he's going to do fine, because nobody's going to be able to keep up with that. And he's absolutely right. The problem with Knicks Go, and there's always a problem, the problem with Knicks Go, he's never gone a mile and a quarter. He's never run this distance. He's run a mile and an eighth. He's run a mile and a 16th. He's never run a mile and a quarter. He's never even run a mile and 3/16. He's only ever run a mile and an eighth in terms of the longest distance. That's a problem because this is if you're gonna go that fast, and I'm gonna talk in a second, there's other horses that are gonna push that pace, then you really have to have something left in the tank for that last quarter of a mile, that last stretch run, especially when you have some really solid closers who can come from off the pace and who can keep up a pretty brisk pace themselves. So I think that's the one strategy for why people are maybe moving a little bit away from Knicks Go. I actually think Essential Quality will end up being the morning line favorite when it's all said and done. I think you might actually find some value with Knicks Go. And if the horse can do it, more power to him. I mean, if Knicks Go can win the Breeders' Cup Classic doing what he does, which is just running as fast as he can for as long as he can, and I have nothing but respect for that. He has won 7 of his 9 last races. The Whitney, this 2 times out ago, was probably the most impressive of those victories. More importantly, he's won at 6 different tracks, showing he's a very versatile horse. He's never run at Del Mar, but he has run at a lot of different tracks and had a success at a lot of different tracks. Well, one of his competitors is Essential Quality. And Essential Quality, all he does is win. The only blemish on his resume is a 4th place finish at the Kentucky Derby, where he did not get the greatest trip. He has won 8 of his 9 career races at 5 different tracks. More importantly, he has beaten Hot Rod Charlie, who I think is a very good horse, multiple times. He did finish behind him in the Derby. Hot Rod Charlie finished 3rd. Essential Quality finished 4th. The thing about Essential Quality is that he's never spectacular. Although I will say, I think the Belmont that he ran was spectacular. He never blows away horses. He just gives you just enough to win. He's also very content to sit back. He doesn't need to be in the lead. He likes to come from off the pace. And he shows that he always has just enough, and he never gives in. He just keeps running, and he can kind of keep accessing more of what he needs, more speed to keep winning. Distance will not be an issue with Essential Quality. This is a horse that won the Belmont in impressive fashion at 1.5 miles. He can run 1.25 miles. He can run 1.125 miles. He can run any distance you want. Extremely versatile horse. I love Essential Quality. I think he's just a great horse. I actually, people were kind of trying to fade Essential Quality at some point over the summer, saying, "Oh, maybe he's not as dominant as we give him credit for." And all he kept doing was winning. Whether that was beating Midnight Bourbon, whether that was beating, Masquerade, and whether Life is Good and other horses like that, he just has been proving that he's really the best horse of this 3-year-old crop, in my opinion. Now, he lost to Medina at the Kentucky Derby. Medina had a great ride and a great trip. Essential Quality didn't. And so that's going to be the really exciting thing, to see the two of them show off, because they've never run against each other since the Kentucky Derby. Of course, Essential Quality, should be noted, has never run at Del Mar as well. So that is also a new factor. So let's talk about Medina Spirit. And of course, this is the horse that has gotten a lot of press because of its positive test for betamethasone after the Kentucky Derby. This has led to suspensions from Bob Baffert, its trainer. So I feel bad, because Medina Spirit's a good horse. And unfortunately, all of this noise has distracted from the horse. And listen, we need to clean up the sport of horse racing. You're not going to get any arguments from that from me. But I think people do sometimes lose sight of how good Medina Spirit really is. Maybe not quite as dominant as Essential Quality, has only won 5 of its 9 career races. But what I will say is he lost some early races in his 3-year-old campaign to Life is Good, who is an outstanding horse, and Rock Your World, who is an outstanding horse. So he's lost to some very, very elite company at that 3-year-old level. He finished 3rd at the Preakness on 2 weeks rest. He came back after a delay. And here's the important thing. He won at Del Mar. He knows that surface. He's had success on that surface. Now, that was only at 1 mile, but still, he's won at Del Mar, and I think there's something to be said for that. Now, unlike Knicks Go, Medina also likes to get to the lead. The difference is Medina Spirit typically likes to slow things down. And if you slow things down, that's not really Knicks Go strategy. So it's going to be interesting to see if Medina tries to take the lead or just tries to sit right off of Knicks Go and put pressure on Knicks Go in a stalking position. I don't know if that's a winning strategy for Medina, actually. I don't know if Medina Spirit's able to keep up with Knicks Go in the pace. So we'll see. But Medina's another one of those front runners who is going to be pushing for that early lead. Now, one of the other horses that I'll mention very quickly is Hot Rod Charlie. And this is a horse that may not be as dominant as the other horses in terms of wins and versatility, but has great form, is a very game horse. Distance will not be an issue. Ran an absolutely incredible second place finish at the Belmont. and more importantly, ran the fastest opening quarter of a mile ever in the history of the Belmont Stakes. This horse can go to the lead, but he also can sit off the pace and then go. So he has versatility where he can do a couple of different things in terms of as a runner. I think the concern there with Hot Rod Charlie is he started his career at Del Mar actually and never finished better than third. Ran in some maiden special weights and some, low level races to start his career and was finishing third, fourth, fifth in those early races. As soon as he left Del Mar and went to Santa Anita, he won. And his career really took off. He moved to Keeneland and won. He moved around and got other victories. So I'm worried about him on that Del Mar surface. Maybe there's something he just does not like about that. So something certainly to keep in mind. Now let's talk about some of those others. Like I said, I think this is a top 4 horse field, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention specifically Art Collector and Max Player. Art Collector has never run a mile and a quarter as well. I think there might be some questions out about distance there. This is a horse that had a really solid 2020, and then kind of as the end of that 2020 campaign concluded and the start of the 2021 campaign began, really struggled. He has come out the last few times doing well and winning, but not against great fields. As I mentioned, I was there for the Charlestown Classic, which is grade 2. Interestingly enough, his last 2 races, and this is kind of just, I think, a quirky thing. His last 2 races were both at a mile and an eighth. The mile and an eighth race at Charlestown was a 3-turn mile and an eighth because that's a 6 furlong track. Then he ran at a mile and an eighth at Belmont, and that is a 1-turn race. So it's just kind of bizarre that he ran 2 back-to-back mile and an eighth races. One of them is 3 turns, and one of them is 1 turn. It just speaks to the size and scope of those 2 tracks and the difference. But so he's got versatility. He can win at different places. I just don't think he has the elite speed to win in this field. He does typically like to be pretty close to the lead. And I just worry about the distance and the pace in this particular case. Now, Max Player is another horse that I will specifically call out. And if you're looking for a long shot to win, I would say Max Player may give you some value there. This is a horse that I think is rounding into form. I think this is a horse that's getting better and has shown the last 2 times out that he's really run well. That Jockey Club Gold Cup was a really great performance, putting away Forza d'Oro and the rest of the field. So distance won't be an issue. The last 2 wins have been in a mile and a quarter. The display up at Saratoga was particularly impressive. So I think that's something to look at. What I will say is if you go back and watch that Jockey Club Gold Cup, that was a pretty slow or moderate opening pace. So the pace is going to have to be faster, obviously, in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Can he run into that speed? The good news is with Max Player, he can sit off the pace and run into something. So he's got a little bit of versatility from a running standpoint. But again, this is a big field. Not everybody's going to be able to get a perfect trip. Not everybody's going to be able to be in a perfect position. Who's got the ability to and the versatility to overcome that in some cases? Or maybe they can't overcome that, and it's really going to come down to the horse that simply gets the best trip, which can be the case, especially on dirt. So oftentimes it's those horses that get to the lead early on dirt that is the big deal. Now, I will just kind of group these last 4 horses together. Tripoli, Express Train, Idle, and Stiletto Boy. Those are the 4 horses that have the longest odds in this race. One of the things that I will mention about all 4 of them is they're all West Coast horses, which I actually think has some advantage. They're all familiar with the surface at Del Mar. None of them have to ship anywhere, so that you're not having to deal with travel. You're not having to deal with getting the horse acclimated. You're not having to deal with any of that. These horses are able to go through their daily routines unbothered leading up to the race. I think that's an underrated aspect of this for those 4 horses. Now, the thing about those 4 is they've all kind of taken turns beating each other. It's not as if one of them is the dominant one of those 4. They all have kind of taken turns winning, placing, showing against each other in different races. The one thing they all have in common is none of them have beaten Medina Spirit. When Medina Spirit runs against them, she beats them. And so that's something to keep in mind. So there's a clear step down between Medina Spirit and I think the rest of these 4. Each one of them that I will say has looked good at times. but I can't see anything better than a show position, a third place finish maybe from any of these four with this particular field. That said, I would lean towards Idle as being the one who can do that. I think Idle has the ability for a mile and a quarter. I think can run into some speed. Idle's probably the one that I would take the biggest chance with in terms of just hitting the board. I don't think winning, but I think you can find something there. Well, listen, I'm not going to give you my win place show picks just yet because, as you can tell, a lot of this will depend on post position, the ease with which some of these horses are able to get to the lead, or a jockey for position. I do think the winner will come from the top four, and right now I'm leaning towards the two great 3-year-olds. I think Essential Quality or Medina Spirit are probably going to be the ones who end up winning this race. And if either of them win this race, I think they probably end up winning the Horse of the Year, although I will cast my ballot, which nobody is asking for the great Super Filly Latruska. I think Max Player and Idle are maybe where you should look for some potential value underneath at this point. But again, a lot will depend on the post position and how the field officially breaks out. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the Breeders' Cup Classic preview. To hold you over until next week when we have all of our Breeders' Cup coverage, including my interview with NBC's Donna Brothers, the top 10 Breeders' Cup races of the last 20 years, and my official picks for where I give you the picks for all of the races over the 2 days at Del Mar. And remember, the best place to get all of this is the Win Place Show podcast and amalfimedia.com. Continue to follow, download, rate, and review the podcast on the platform of your choice. Finally, just a reminder to subscribe to the Win Place Show on YouTube, which is linked in the episode notes. Follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace and check out amalfimedia.com for all the great horse racing content you need to get you through the Breeders' Cup and beyond. And we're catching up on the beyond, but we have a lot of great coverage coming for you after the Breeders' Cup. Until next time, friends, I'm Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.